Hey guys, it's Scott from fxmissions.com. Just a note, I've finished the trilogy of anthologies from the forefront, and all 3 books are currently available on Amazon. Welcome to From the Forefront, an FX Missions podcast. Stories about courageous souls who felt the call of missions and obeyed. Hi, Scott McClelland here. Thanks for joining the FX Missions From the Forefront podcast. Please do share with others about From the Forefront. Rate us on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, wherever you get your content, and let us know how we can serve you better. We're pretty excited today, and kind of thankful might be a good way to say it, to be joined by a friend of a few years now, Guy Yasika. Guy, did I say that right?
Absolutely perfect.
Yasika. Something tells me that's Asian.
People think that, but no, it's not. It's European.
Okay. Well, I had you Japanese roots here, man. Thanks for. So, what is the roots of Yasika? Polish?
Polish, Serbian. It kind of got truncated in at Ellis Island, so don't know the actual name. But
okay.
All the Yasikas are related, so because of misspellings and stuff.
Well, yeah, Ellis Island. There was a lot of, I can't spell that. We're going to make that Smith.
Right.
I think some of that went on anyway. At least I imagine it to be so. Thanks for joining us, Guy. I really appreciate you being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you've got something of an interesting story, and folks who are listening today are in for a treat, I believe. We really appreciate you taking some time aside here and just get into a little bit here, if we can, about your background, where you're from, maybe some of your family history.
Sure. I'm, I guess nowadays, Northeast guy, living in Jersey, bulk of my life. Was born in Cleveland. So I tell people all the time, I got a laid back attitude. I just got to hurry up about it. I've been in sales, technical sales, the bulk of my life here in the Northeast. We're selling in New York City and now in the Philadelphia region. Right now, currently in the telco environment.
Right. Well, that's how we know each other, because that's the world I'm in. We met a few years ago, and I considered you a friend all along, and really appreciate everything you've done to help us. And also finding out more about your story has been captivating, might be a good way to put it. So were you born in Cleveland?
Yeah, I was born right outside the airport in a little town called Brook Park, which is not so little anymore. It's was one of those post-50s development. I was born in 56, so after the World War II, one of these development areas. And it's just not the same. Went back a few years ago. It's just not the same place. Wow.
That's the way it works, huh? All that stuff called development is just growing. I guess Cleveland's right there on a main, is that the lake it's on there?
Yeah, back when you lived in the area, we weren't even allowed to touch the water in the lake because the dead fish were slapping up. When we went back with my kids just a while back ago, we saw people water skiing on Lake Erie. So it's just the whole area changed quite a bit.
Wow. Well, either they got braver or it got cleaned up, or maybe both. That's wild. Now, Jersey, you spent a good bit of time in New York City and Jersey area, and then now in Philly. So, that's kind of the opposite of where I'm from, and yet we're friends. I'm proud of us for that.
It's the human connection, right? That's what it's all about.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think, in Christ, we find the brotherhood. It's interesting to me that in Christ, there is a context. He created a context between us for a relationship to be cultivated. There is a real foundation there in him for that. And I've been able to cultivate that in different places around the world. Super thankful to find that and take advantage of it. So thanks. That's been a pleasure with you as well.
And I don't think we as Christians do enough of that, to be honest with you. I think being bound together as a body of Christ, I think we need to do a better job of helping each other, encouraging each other, and doing whatever God is, pushing us to do. This being an example, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree. And I think a lot of times when we take the time to make a small investment in that space, that we're sometimes surprised by the gratification and the sort of reward or how it builds us up. And we mischaracterize it as something special or unique when I think what's unique or special is that we've taken time to make an investment, and we get wherever we make an investment in Christ's body, it's going to yield a return. So I think that we got to focus on that, just like you're saying.
100% agree.
Amen. So, hey, tell us a little bit about your hobbies, your interests. Give us that 1,000-foot view of what you like to do.
I guess historically, I'm kind of a workaholic. I put a lot of passion into what I do for a living. And I think that's been bad and good to a large degree.
Mm-hmm.
Today, I own a small farm down in South Jersey. When I say small, I mean like 10 acres.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just a couple of, my wife fancies herself she calls it sheep to shawl. So we got a bunch of sheep, a couple of alpacas. We get the fiber off of that. She turns it into wool and turns that into a sweater or a scarf or other stuff.
Wow.
We have a rescue horse, a couple of rescue donkeys out here, and it's more labor of love than it is a profitability thing. There is no profit in farming, as every farmer in this country could tell you, small or large.
Yeah.
But that's probably the most unique thing about me is the farm. I've got 5 kids, 3 beautiful daughters, 2 wonderful stepsons. It's 11 grandkids today and counting. So
awesome.
I've been truly blessed.
Wow. Yes, you have. That's really cool. I didn't know that you had that size family, but congratulations on 3 daughters. I've got 3 daughters. We stopped the train at that point. So here we are, almost got them raised. So we're thankful for that.
Oh, the fun's yet to begin.
That's what they tell me, especially from a grandchildren standpoint. My oldest is in her upper 20s. She's been married for about 4 years now, and so we look on with interest. Let me just say it that way. Especially my wife is looking on with interest about the possibility of grandkids.
They're such a blessing. We have Grandkids Day here on the farm, and it is the most wonderful day of my life each year. They're all together. We build obstacle courses. They do things they can't do up in North Jersey. They shoot bow and arrows. We set up a ninja course that they run around and experiment and do things their parents wouldn't normally let them do. We have fireworks at the end of the day. It's quite an event and just an amazing day of just family. I love it. I cherish it.
That is wonderful. That's really cool and a neat thing that you guys are doing that. They'll remember that for the rest of their lives, I'm sure of it.
That was my wife's idea. Rather than have a bunch of individual, little things, let's just make one big whoop-de-doo day. Bring a clown in or horseback riding or a magician or whatever it takes to entertain them in part. And provide some other entertainment. Just let them run around a farm and do things they couldn't do up north.
Awesome, yeah, that's cool. That's cool. Well, I just thought about this in this way, so hopefully this just doesn't sound too weird. But in some ways, you're a unique guy, and I know you've had, as we all have, unique and impactful life experiences. But I would think you're a person with a really unique situation because you are one of, I don't know, maybe you know the number. You're one of a few people, I guess, who were in Tower 1 on 9/11.
Not a few. There were close to 80,000 people in the building that morning in Tower 1 alone. So,
right. Well, I didn't know. There were that many people in there. And you happen to be, thank God, you're a survivor. And I'm sure that every person that survived that has a story to tell. You, without, no exception to that. How many people were in the building when the plane, that Tower 1 was hit first? Am I correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So how many people, do you know how many people were in the building when that happened?
The buildings they say at full occupancy do about 100,000, and
Uh-huh.
planes hit right around 20 of 25 of 9, so they weren't at full occupancy just yet. So the guesstimates around between 70 and 80,000 physically in the building. That doesn't count
Mm.
tower 2 or the numbers around the building or the numbers in the mall below or anything like that. I mean, you're talking hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people.
Wow. I've got some questions surrounding this content. Can you give us just a quick rundown? And also, I know you've got a more thorough written testimony that we can make available with a link in the show notes here so folks can get to that so they can read in detail everything that you went through. But I'm guessing it was a normal day on September 11th, 2001 before 8:30 Eastern
It was a
time.
beautiful day. We were talking about where we were going to eat lunch and how wonderful it was outside. It was a wonderful late summer, early fall, whichever way you want to look at it, day. It was going to be about 80 degrees. The skies were blue and just was setting up to be gorgeous.
Man, and do I understand right? There was something that happened. I've read your testimony a few times and watched some of the video content that you've also made, but there was something unusual about your morning routine that morning.
Yeah. So I had to be in the office early, so I was at my desk for a call at 8:30. I had a conference call set up with my boss and a large Fortune 50 company we were doing business with. I got the call at 8:30, and my boss said, "Call's been canceled." So I was like, "Oh, great! I got in, a little early for nothing." So guys came into the office just right after that call and asked if I wanted to go down to the cafeteria on the 43rd floor to have some breakfast. And I just had half an hour clear up on my schedule. So I said, sure, why not? And it was very fortuitous that happened.
Now, what floor were you working on day to day?
Our offices were on the 78th floor of Tower 1, which was about 10 stories, 8 stories below from where the plane entered the building. Had I stayed, I would have had a bird's eye view of the wheels of the plane or the underbelly of the plane.
My word. Wow. So you got a freed up schedule. The call was canceled. I hear some hallelujahs in the in the atmosphere here related to that, and you got a chance to go down to breakfast, which you did. Were you on that cafeteria floor when the plane made impact?
Yeah, we had just sat down. I got a Diet Pepsi and a granola. Some things you just remember, right?
Yeah.
Sat down. The plane hit. The building was moving in a very big way. In fact, I grabbed the desk or the table in front of me for stability because that's how much torque was in the building when it was impacted. And you had the feeling that the building was falling over. Of course, the buildings were designed to sway. In a good windstorm, those buildings would move 10 feet either way. But a plane hit it. It moved significantly further than that. And even on the 43rd floor, you could feel the difference. Thank God it didn't fall over. I honestly believe that was what was trying to get done. I honestly believe they were trying to. Again, if you look at the way they hit the buildings from one side and then the other side, they were trying to push them over one way or the other to provide maximum carnage.
Yeah.
But to God's grace, the building didn't go down. It sprang back up. It stayed up, and kind of where the story starts, right?
Yeah, well, now how long did it take before the building stabilized in terms of swaying after impact? Was that a 30 seconds or a few minutes?
It was fairly quick, time-wise, because you start going into what the heck's going on mode. Mm-hmm. Probably less than a minute, like maybe 30 seconds, 45 seconds, something like that.
Right. And so what happened as soon as you got your bearings, or at least what part of your bearings you could get at that point? What was the next thing that happened?
From my perspective, for me, I got on my knees. I didn't know what happened at that point in time. We knew there was something bad going on. We could look out the windows and see things starting to fall down from the upper stories. I just got on my knees in the middle of the cafeteria, prayed, and thanked God for surviving whatever just happened. Because I honestly thought the building was going over. I mean, I didn't think we were going to survive. When we got up, when I got up off my knees, the room was just about emptied. It was just the three of us at the table. The cafeteria workers were gone. And I didn't, it's funny. People tell you to take notice of emergency exits for a reason, because in the heat of the moment, you really don't know where they are. You get a little confused. So we eventually found them, and by the time we got to the stairwell, it was a very crowded space, as you could imagine, with 80,000 or 70,000 people trying to get out of a building.
How wide would you say that stairwell was? I mean, help us visualize what you experienced when you were able to get out into the stairwell. Is that a 10-foot wide? Is that a 20-foot wide? I mean, how many people standing shoulder to shoulder could fit across that space?
It was a comfortable 2x2 descent. You could do 3 potentially if you want to be crowded, but we went down in rows of 2s. Each person had grabbed.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the way it worked out.
Okay, so you stepped into what was a flow of humanity. Am I right?
It was amazing how many people were in the stairwell already. It was shocking.
Wow. So did you pretty quickly get queued up and start moving, or was it immediate when you got in that space?
People didn't know what happened, right? So there was no rush to the stairs. There was nobody running down the stairs. There was nobody screaming anything. It was, okay, this is as relatively order of an exit as you could possibly imagine. Before we got into the stairwell, there was a woman that was very anxious, not because of anything that occurred, but she's highly claustrophobic, and she didn't want to go in the stairwell. And it was like, you have to. There's just no option. You've got to, you got to get out, and the only way out is down. And the only way down is because the elevators weren't working at the time. We didn't know why they weren't working. So eventually I coaxed her into the building and was talking her, down the stairs as we descended, trying to make some jokes, keep the atmosphere light, and get her through her anxiety of tight spaces.
Wow. So there's a fairly orderly descent. You're going down 40x floors. I mean, that takes a minute, and it's kind of rigorous, I would guess. Yeah,
it takes more than a minute. It took almost a half an hour, I would think.
Wow, half an hour to get. Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, I'm from sea level and small town, so I really can't imagine descending 40 some floors in a stairwell from Tower 1, but it occurs to me that it would not be a small thing. And so what did that particular emergency exit at the ground level, did that put you guys outside the building, or how did that work?
No, by the time we got, the stairwell descent was an interesting story, and it's worth the read in what I wrote up. So what I did after the whole experience is I wrote the details up, because a lot of people were asking a lot of questions, and I was not in a frame of mind to talk about it over and over and over again. So I just wrote it up and just mailed it out, and honestly used it as a witnessing tool for about a year, maybe 2 years after the event, because people would ask, and I would just share my written story. But when we got out of the stairwell, we got out into the main lobby of the Trade Center, and I still have haunting images of things. I mean, the best I can describe it is, if you've ever seen the Grand Canyon, taking a picture of it's a waste of time. Trying to describe somebody, it's a waste of time. It's something you just have to experience, the beauty and the wonder of the canyon. Kind of the exact opposite in the lobby of 9/11. Your eyes just can't uncover or describe the amount of destruction your eyes can hold. And it's the smells, it's the cries, it's everything that goes into, and everything you've seen on TV. And I don't talk about those things because they just bring back really bad nights. But you can't take an image of it, you can take a picture of it, and you can't adequately put it into words that are meaningful to anybody. And I hope nobody listening to this podcast ever experiences anything like that.
Haunting, the way you describe it. And I know from the Grand Canyon, you just can't fit everything that's out there into your brain. It's an overwhelming kind of situation. So in that way, the contrast makes a lot of sense to me. Fairly rapidly, I guess, you when you got to the bottom, you got out. You got out of the building.
Yeah, they stopped letting us out right out the building because of everything that was coming down. So they took us through the mall. Attached to the Trade Center was this huge shopping complex, and it was underground. So we went out underground through the mall, away from the debris, and came out on the north side of the path area, of the north side of the mall, And when we looked up,
Mm-hmm.
we saw the hole in the building where the plane had hit, and we realized that had we been in our offices at that time, the outcome would have been very different.
Yeah. Were you still with the couple of guys you had taken breakfast with during that time,
Yeah,
or?
well, the one guy got separated from us, myself and one of my other coworkers. Once we got out, again, there's a little old historic church just outside of the Trade Center. It's still there. It's absolutely still intact. In fact, it was a stage.
I remember it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I got on my
Yeah.
knees right outside that church and prayed again. Thank God for just His mercy and directing me, because I was looking to be. I mean, Pete, you always wonder what your mind is like in those situations. I know for a fact
Mm-hmm.
that if I was on the 78th floor, we wouldn't be talking. I was looking to be of help. I'm trained in first aid. So, it was either get out of the way or be of assistance was my mindset. And I was looking for a way to be of assistance. And I couldn't find any. The New York first responders are a very well organized group of people. And by the time, we had gotten out of the building, everything was very much staged and organized, and the triage areas were set up, and it was, the best help I could be was to stay out of the way.
Yeah.
So when I got to the church, we prayed, and when I got up from my knees, and this is something you'll never understand as not being in New York, but when I got up off my knees, I turned around. There was a cab with its door open in New York City, which is like finding a unicorn. It's the same exact equivalence. So,
I can well imagine. Now, I've been in the city a few times, but I wouldn't appreciate it like someone who tried to manage that daily. There's a cab with its door open. I'm guessing you got inside, closed the door, and said, "Giddy up."
Yeah, we did. We wanted to go to New Jersey, and they wouldn't. They said all the bridges and tunnels were closed at that time. So he took us to Penn. He was taking us to Penn Station. So he spun around and turned north, and just as we were like a block or two away, Tower 2 collapsed.
So Tower 2 at that point was impacted. I don't know how many minutes it was. It was a number of minutes later, but it wasn't an hour later or anything.
No, it was, I think, like right around 10 minutes, 15 minutes later. It was fairly quick.
Okay. And Tower 2 is the first one that came down, and then Tower 1 followed, correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
And I find that kind of amazing, too, because when Tower 1 got hit, they evacuated Tower 2. Then they made the historic mistake of saying to try to clear the area because of all the people, watching all the things that were happening in Tower 1. They were trying to get people back up in Tower 2 to kind of clear the area so they could stage the rescue effort and the flames, put the fire out and stuff. So some people actually did go back up in 2, but because Tower 2 was evacuated, there were much less people in Tower 2 when it came down. So I think God's grace was letting people like me get out of Tower 1, and I think the whole time God was trying to minimize the amount of carnage and the amount of people that were going to die that day. So Tower 2, I think, came down fortuitously because there were less people to be affected by it. It gave Tower 1 more time to be evacuated, and then Tower 1 came down after that.
I would guess that many, if not most of the people who will hear our conversation here have some kind of a visual of New York City, and probably they have seen some of the coverage and the monuments and such as that. Even the little church there I've seen that you mentioned. But this World Trade Center complex, which of course was a number of buildings besides Tower 1 and 2 were the twins, obviously, and then there's a bunch of other buildings around that. I think you said there were, were there 500,000 people that worked in that area every day?
Easily. Absolutely easily.
Okay.
If you look at what was going on, so Tower 2, had they been successful at falling it like a tree, would have fell right on top of the stock exchange. It just would have reached that far. And if they had gotten Tower 2 to go the other way, it would have done twice as much damage. So I think they were purposeful in what they were trying to do and how they were trying to do it.
Yeah, maximum casualty impact. I'm sure there is. That probably the most rich target in that terms that would be available in the States, I would guess.
Yes.
Wow. So Manhattan Island, again, I'm an outsider, and that's putting it mildly. But as I understand, this is kind of right at the tip of Manhattan Island. So you exited, you got out, you went north on the island, and then to Penn Station. Is that where you guys ended up?
Yes.
And now that's a subway station, correct?
It's one of two main train stations into New York. Grand Central is the one from the north, Connecticut, Boston. Penn Station is from the south for Pennsylvania, D.C. Those types of trains terminate there.
Okay.
So my trip home was to Jersey at that point because that's the way I commuted in was by train. So I was looking for a train ride home at that point.
Wow. So now were trains running? Were you able to get on a train?
Well, it's funny story. No, yes and no. So just as we got into the train station, they announced, well, we got to a Jersey train was leaving. So I got on the train and sat down. And at that point in time, I started going into shock and trying to process what just happened and what was going on. And then they announced we had to get off. The train was mobbed, as you could imagine. I mean, just like standing room only, people pressed against each other.
Yeah, crushed in, yes.
They announced the train wasn't going anywhere, that they're closing the train station. They're closing the station, and we all had to exit. They made several announcements, but I had nowhere to go. I mean, where am I going to go? My office is now collapsed. I don't have any friends in the city. I don't have a car in the city. There's nothing for me to do but go home. So I just sat in the train and said, well, sooner or later, this train's going to go somewhere. If not, it's as good a place to sit as any. So I might as well just stay here. So after about the third announcement, the train was not even a third full. It was almost empty. They closed the doors and the train went to Jersey.
Wow. So that was great that you took that approach. It sounds like you got out of there sooner than those 2/3 of people who listened to what was being said on the intercom.
Had I not gotten out of there at that time, I probably wouldn't have gotten out till the next day.
Oh, mercy. Which would have heightened the entire effect and made it that much more difficult for your family. I know we've got just about 10 minutes left. So I want to talk I've got a number of questions and we may not get to them all, which is fine. But how long before you were reunited with your family, with your wife?
Well, my wife picked me up at the train station. So just before I went into the Penn Station, there was a little sports memorabilia store just outside of Penn Station is attached to Madison Square Garden. So there's a little sports memorabilia store just outside of Madison Square Garden on a corner there. It's no longer there. There's all kinds of funny stories around these stories, by the way, but which one day we'll have to talk about. I walked into the sports memorabilia store and the guy looked at me and he goes, "You were there?" And I said, "Yes, I got to use your phone." He handed me his phone. He let me make a phone call. After about the fifth or sixth try, I was able to connect to my home phone and was able to tell my wife I was alive. And at that point in time, she was thankful, and we both cried on the phone for a little bit. And I just told her I'm going to try and get home as soon as I can. When I got to the train station, I just called her from the payphone and told her to come pick me up, and she did.
Wow. Well, that was a lot of grace applied to several things there. Thank God for that and for you guys being reunited. I'm going to just give you a few rapid fire questions if I can, and we don't have to rush through the answers. It's just some things that came to my mind. How has your life changed, and what's different about what's important to you now? We're 18 years later here. I know it's quite a while later, but I would expect that something like this and surviving something like this would be a game changer in terms of life. Is that right?
Yes and no. Yes, in that things changed, and it was a great deal of heartache after 9/11. That's a whole nother story about financial hardship and a whole bunch of other survivor's guilt and a whole host of other things that happened to occur. But from a faith standpoint, at that point in time, I was a pretty strong Christian. I felt pretty good about my faith and felt like I was moving in the right direction. And back then, it was the Promise Keepers movement was strong, and I just felt I felt very close to God at that point in time and very connected. And in the post 9/11 world, we were given ample opportunity to talk about what our experiences were like, both my wife's and mine, because hers was very different than mine.
Mm-hmm.
we were able to give God's, grace to it. In fact, I do things like this because I'm a firm believer if God gives you a story, you've got to tell it. You don't keep it to yourself.
Yes.
As hard as they are to go through sometimes, I think they're necessary for people. I think we forget too quickly what God has done for us and the grace he's given us. And I don't want to ever forget that.
Yeah. So I remember Promise Keepers, and that's cool that you'd mentioned that. It was a movement, a men's movement, obviously, for those who don't know about it, that impacted the entire nation. It was very powerful, very motivational, and swept a lot of people into seriousness about their faith and into a brotherhood of sorts that I really remember fondly, for sure.
100% right. I agree.
Yeah. We're going to run out of runway here, but I'd like to make sure anything else that we haven't covered, that I'd love to make sure that we mention anything that comes to mind for you or has come to mind that we haven't mentioned. And as we wrap up, I want to make sure and give people some contact or a way to get more of your story. We may get together and do another podcast, which there's probably material for 10 of those and still have a half besides that. But I want to make sure and get people to the resources where they can find out more about your story. But what else have we not talked about that you'd like to mention about your experience? I know your wife wrote a book. I know you've written some testimonies, but I want to make sure and cover anything that we haven't mentioned.
At the end of the day, I think the whole 9/11 experience, we saw the equivalent of the parting of the Red Seas. Is what I always tell people. There were 3 high-rise buildings, skyscrapers, that fell in New York City on that day. And none of them fell in such a way where they compromised buildings next to them, which is, if you know how close these buildings are, we're talking 100 feet apart in some cases. And to have them fall that precisely, 3 buildings fall that precisely in New York. There was Tower 1, Tower 2, and Tower 7. All 3 buildings fell in such a way. In fact, if you look at Tower 2, which fell first, it does begin to list, meaning kind of start to tilt. And then somewhere in the middle of that, it straightens up and just falls on itself in an implosion sort of way. And there are conspiracy theories out there that this was all planned and it was, because it was too precise of a collapse. But I'm not into conspiracy theories. I'm into seeing what I saw. And, I saw the hand of God just bless New York, bless a bunch of people that had intent to doing maximum evil in a city and kill hundreds of thousands of innocent people. To find that, yes, it was tragic. There were around 2,786, if I remember the exact number, people died that day. And the fact that there were only 2,700 people that died that day is in itself a miracle, because each building could hold 100,000 people. The mall around that, easily another 100,000. When you think of the offices that connected to those buildings and other related things, easily another 100,000 people. Getting off that block, you're looking at another several 100,000 people. So they were trying to kill 1 million people that day easily, and they didn't succeed at the end of the day.
Just one question there, and then we'll get that contact. Did you have to personally go through a forgiveness exercise related to those who perpetrated these events?
You're the first person to ask me that. I guess I forget. I don't know. I can't answer that intelligently. I have to think about that. I don't know that I have forgiven. I'm trying to forget still, but I don't know that I've forgiven. That's a very good question. I don't know.
Well, yeah. I appreciate you telling us your story, Guy. I really appreciate you and your transparency, not only in this podcast, but also in the things you've written. Really quickly, let's get the information for your wife's book, and also for, I think I can find the link to the more complete testimony. Is there if someone wanted to follow up with you personally, I think I can get the links to save us time. But if anyone wanted to follow up with you personally or know more about what you're doing now, how would we send them to you?
Yeah, I've got a website up. It's $1apologist.net, which is probably the best way to get in touch with me. And there's a couple of blogs up there that they could kind of sort through. Certainly the 9/11 testimony is up there. And a few other things that might be of interest to folks. My email address is just simply my name, gyasika@gmail.com. If anyone wants to email me, feel free.
Okay. G as in your first initial?
Right.
And last name?
Yasika.
Okay. And the $1 apologist is the number one, followed by the word dollar, correct?
All spelled out. One, O-N-E.
Okay. O-N-E. That's going to help us. Thanks again for being here, Guy. And we'll follow up with you later. I'd like to get some more content from you, but I really appreciate very much you telling your story. Blessings to you, bro. This podcast made possible through the partnership of Engaging Missions Show, bringing missions home, and encouraging you to hear a message, make connections, and take action. Find out more at engagingmissions.com. Thanks for joining us for the FX Missions podcast from the forefront. If you'd like to find out more about FX Missions, please do so at our blog, fxmissions.com. Quite a bit of content out there. We hope you enjoy it. Also, if you'd like to rate us on iTunes or whatever podcast service you use, we would really appreciate it. And find out more about today's guest at our Facebook page. Just search for From the Forefront on Facebook. If you know of someone who should be featured on From the Forefront because of their forefront missions experience or exploits, please reach out to us at info@fxmissions.com. Thanks again for joining us. And until next time, I'm Scott McClelland, and you have a good one.